Hello everyone, my name is Sherry Soltani and you are watching Today TV. Affordable housing in BC is a significant problem that we are facing every day. Finding a decent home that we can afford is becoming increasingly difficult. We wanted to learn about the government's actions to address this housing crisis in BC. Today, we have the privilege of hosting a member of parliament for City of Port Moody and Coquitlam, Bonita Zarrillo, who will provide insights into these concerns. Please stay with us. Hello, Bonita. How are you today?
Really good. Thank you so much for inviting me.
Well, thank you for joining us. You know that our discussion today is about affordable housing. Now, what specific measures or policies are being implemented in British Columbia to address the growing issue of affordable housing in the province?
Such an important question. You know, in communities across BC, we're seeing more and more scarcity of housing, more and more homelessness in community. It's becoming critical. We know that we're in a housing crisis right now. So, as federal government representative, I'm obviously working closely with the federal government as well on these issues. But in BC, we do have a government that is very focused on solving the affordable housing crisis and the crises that we are seeing unfolding in our communities across the province. And specifically over the years, even when I was a city councillor, it was always wonderful to see the BC government front and center trying to solve this crisis. So we know that the empty housing tax or the empty homes tax was a strategy that was used here in BC. And most recently, we know that David Eby and the BC NDP government started looking at regulating short-term rentals like Airbnb or VRBO. So I think those things are happening locally. On the federal level, we know that this crisis came over many, many years. About 40 years ago, the federal government got out of the business of affordable and social housing, including purpose-built rental and co-ops, and those things need to be addressed. So I was happy to see that recently that there was a policy in place to get rid of the GST on purpose-built rental. Having to pay GST on purpose-built rental has been a barrier for the development community to get purpose-built rental built, and I'm happy to see that removed. And I know even when I was a city councillor in Coquitlam, this was a policy that we asked for as a city many years ago, and I'm glad to see it taken up. And I'm hoping that this, among other policies, will spark some building of purpose-built, stable rental.
Well, thank you. Now, can you provide an update on the progress made in increasing the supply of affordable housing units in BC, and how are these initiatives funded?
Mm-hmm. So this is information that cities are collecting right now. That was a directive from the BC government that cities should be collecting their housing starts and data around their housing. And we know that they're also working in partnership with not-for-profits. So cities do have that information. And I know this kind of goes back to what I was mentioning earlier about the fact that the federal government got out of the affordable housing I don't want to say business, but the affordable housing business about 40 years ago. But within that term, there was also operating agreements that had been signed, operating agreements with not-for-profits that subsidized rental housing and that had people in rental and social housing. And what we found over the last 10 years is that we're losing that subsidized rental housing at a rate of 15 to 1. So 15 units of affordable housing is being lost for every 1 unit that's being built. This is a really large problem, and this is something that the NDP federally have been working on and highlighting, and it is one of the reasons that the NDP and Jenny Kwan, the housing critic for federal NDP, has been talking about a fund. There needs to be a federal fund to retain some of this affordable housing.
Are there any ideas to make sure that the rent doesn't go up too much and that people do not lose their homes.
This is such a big concern, such a
Yeah.
big concern. And I know that rent controls and those sort of pieces of legislation are provincial. But on the federal level, this was a key issue that the federal NDP recognized, that people needed assistance with the rent. And I'm happy to say that there was a rental housing top-up, a $500 top-up that was available to low-income renters at the beginning of the year federally. And those are the kind of initiatives that we're going to have to imply, or we're going to have to supply at the federal level until we can get purpose-built rental back available in our communities, until we can see some of the results of the provincial strategies that have been taken, like the empty homes tax, like the short-term rental legislation that just came out. We're going to be seeing the results of that. On the federal level, we have to keep up with a similar empty homes tax. We cannot be using housing as investment vehicles. We've seen what that does. It pushes people out onto the street. Mm-hmm. It makes it harder for people to find rental homes. And at this point in time, we know young families, young people are saying that they will never be able, or they feel like they will never be able to get into a home they own. And that's
especially in BC.
Especially in BC, where the incomes just haven't kept up with the cost of living. And I think that's another key issue, is that incomes have not kept up. And we need to address that too on the federal level. We need to address that. And that's why minimum wages need to go up. The cost of living needs to match. Someone should be able to have one job, full-time job, and be able to.
So literally everything has to change federally before it changes to provincial.
Not necessarily. I think it's on every level. We know that cities have really stepped up. Cities have really stepped up in the way of affordable housing. I know in Coquitlam there was just an announcement just recently that they came forward with almost $5 million to help an affordable housing project. So every level of government needs to be doing it. But I know that the federal government, with the Liberals now and the Conservatives before them, really did drop the ball on affordable housing, on investing in affordable housing, and investing on these operating agreements and subsidies to not-for-profits that have really been carrying the major amount of affordable housing in this country for decades.
For decades, yeah. Thanks, Bonita. Now, what measures are being taken to ensure that affordable housing projects are developed in a lasting and environmentally friendly way?
Yes, again, such an important question, because these are all the things that we're thinking about for the next generation of affordable housing. We know that much of the affordable housing that was built in the 70s and the 80s is at the end of its life, for the reasons that you just outlined, that perhaps it wasn't maintained, the sustainability of it was not having to deal with the kind of climate change factors that we're going to be dealing with in the future. So there are federal regulations around this on how housing needs to be built. We know there's a federal building code as well as a provincial building code. And that is also work that needs to be done to collaborate on those building codes and to make sure that housing is sustainable and resilient for the future, but also accessibility friendly. Yes. And this wasn't something that was really taken into consideration when the kind of 40 years ago when the big program federally came into place. And we know now that housing needs to be accessible. It needs to be accessible. Up to 1 in 4 Canadians will have a disability over the next 3 decades. Mm-hmm. And we need to make sure that the new generation of affordable housing is resilient, but also accessible.
Yes. Just giving an example, my daughter actually rented an apartment in New Westminster, and the rent for 1-bedroom apartment was $2,200. And that's like, paying a mortgage really. And now the mortgage went up and it's like crazy by, for young generation, it's very hard to afford something like that unless if they have a good jobs,
And I think that's a twofold problem. Over the last 8 or 9 years, there's been a lot of luxury condos built. And they were built on the Liberals and the Conservatives before them decided that they were going to have a market solution around affordable housing, and that their only tactic was going to try to be to boost supply. Mm. And what got built was luxury condos. And yes. The cost of those condos are sometimes over $500,000 just for a 1-bedroom. That means that the person that owns that is looking for the rent to cover their mortgage, which is over $2,000. And so that becomes a very expensive way to build housing. We know that supply is needed, but we need the right kind of supply that's going to be affordable for people to live in.
That's right, yeah. Now, how is the government collaborating with local municipalities and nonprofit organizations to tackle the affordable housing crisis in BC?
Well, there's every politician is seized with this issue at every level. And it's being really done community by community by community right now. I appreciate the work that was done by the BC NDP, Selena Robinson, that put a housing hub together almost immediately when she became the housing minister many years back. And it's a collaboration by collaboration, community by community process right now. Now, I was working on the Housing Accelerator Fund myself federally, and there was an injection of funds as well as commitment from the federal government to work with communities with the Housing Accelerator Fund. It's not to build housing, that's not what it's for, but it's to encourage or support the building of housing at cities. So I think at this point in time, it's community by community, it's almost relationship by relationship, but we have all not-for-profits, every level of government really seized and working on moving forward on affordable housing.
Now, each communities will have BC housing. Like, do they have to wait for in a wait list, and how does that work?
Yes, so every municipality, every city in this province would have a connection with BC Housing, and of course we have more projects and more need than even BC Housing or the federal government can supply at this point in time. And that's why I'm proud of the BC government. I'm proud of the BC NDP government that has really invested in affordable housing over the last 8 years. They've really invested. The federal government needs to come to the table. But in my office, I see people all the time that have been on the BC housing waiting list for affordable housing for 2, 3, 4, sometimes up to 7 years waiting for housing. And the accessible housing too, I mean, it's not necessarily available. There's just more need out there.
So what do they do meantime for those people who are waiting?
Some of them are in housing. Some of them are in housing already. It's just not adequate or appropriate for their family size. We know that there's been studies done that people, there are many people that are living in housing that is not large enough for their families or can accommodate their disability. So that's definitely an area that needs to be looked at. But again, this is provincial housing is of provincial jurisdiction traditionally, and it's not until recently that the federal government, the federal Liberals, have finally realized, after very much advocacy on the part of the federal NDP, that they need to get into the game of housing. So I'm hoping to see, as you were saying earlier, how are we going to see these results? I'm hoping that these small investments that the federal government made, and they need to make larger investments going forward, help the provinces and the cities to deal with this problem.
Now, can you share insights on the affordability challenges faced by low-income families, seniors especially, and vulnerable population and young people, and how government can support them?
Thank you for asking me this question. As the critic for disability inclusion and also the critic for infrastructure and communities, I see and I speak to people all the time who are being displaced from their housing. Sometimes they're long-term rental housing. They could have been in a long-term rental unit for a decade or more, and they're being displaced to redevelopment. And I think this is an area that we need to immediately address as a federal government. Again, the federal NDP has been talking about a major fund. The federal government needs to come forward with a major fund to protect this housing now, because we can't continue to lose 15 units of affordable housing when we're only building one back. And I think that is an area that we need to address immediately, is people losing their housing. And then the initiatives around, we talked earlier, and you mentioned here young people, like we'd like young people to be able to own a home. And we need policies around income supports and income increases. Right now, there's Canadians and working 3 jobs, and they still can't afford to get into a home. There is a huge disconnect between income levels in this country and housing. And the federal government needs to address that at the level of employment income. They need to have protection for employment income. We talk about the gig economy. We have many workers, even in our people in our community, that work in the gig economy, and they have limited protection. They don't have the incomes that they deserve, and we really need to get busy on that work. And that's another initiative that the federal NDP is working on, which is protection of workers. Right now, we'd like to see more and more unionized workers. We're seeing a rebirth of the union movement happening now among young people who realize that they deserve the protection of a pension. They deserve the protection of a good paying job. And I'm happy to see that that resurgence of the power of collective unions when it comes to income supports and maintaining pensions for your future. We know a lot of seniors that rely on their pensions, and I can't imagine that the next generation of seniors, kids that are now in their 20s and 30s, wouldn't have a pension.
Exactly. Especially a lot of seniors, they still have paying mortgages if they have their own homes. Not many of seniors, they actually, are mortgage free, and or they're renting. And some seniors that they are renting, and they don't have the affordable housing in BC, or they don't have like BC housing. Like, it's so hard for them because living on that pension and pay that rent, it's going to be so hard for them.
And that goes back to something you were saying about the $2,200 a month.
Exactly. Yeah.
I've had seniors come to my office and say that they were paying $800 or $900, and suddenly they're being asked to sign rent increases over what is allowed.
Yes. Yeah.
$400 and $500 increases in their rent, and if they don't pay it, that they'll be displaced. And this is petrifying for seniors, for persons with disabilities. I was recently with a mother who had a daughter with a disability, and their rent went from $800 to $1,200 based on a displacement. And it's life-changing for them if they don't have the support of affordable housing. And it really shouldn't be that
they lose their homes.
That they lose their homes.
Yeah,
exactly.
They lose their homes.
Exactly right.
Now, is there any strategies are being considered to deal with empty or unused properties in BC? As we know, there's a lot of properties. People come here, buy properties, and they don't use it, they leave it. Now, is there any strategies being used for those properties to make more affordable homes available?
Well, it's interesting you should ask that question because I'm I'm on a parliamentary committee that looks after housing, and I was asking this question recently to CMHC, which is the Canadian Mortgage and Housing Corporation that works with provincial partners, not-for-profits, and also underwrites mortgages for quite often first-time home buyers. And I was asking them, what is their plan? Like, first of all, do they know how many empty homes exist in Canada? They did not. They did not know. We're not capturing it. And then I was asking, are there strategies that could be used to get these housing units on the market? So this needs more exploration, even at the highest levels. We need to be collecting the data on this federally. I know that the provincial government here in BC is farther along than the federal government is on this. They realized that those empty homes were a problem, and they wanted to get them into the housing supply. And so they did apply their empty homes tax, which has been very successful in BC. So I applaud the BC NDP for that work that they're doing. And now their next stage here, or another stage that they're doing, is looking at these short-term rentals and how much could be brought in. And I was just listening to the news this morning, and they were saying in the interior, there's over 10,000 short-term rental units that could potentially come back into mainstream long-term rental housing. Yeah. And that is a solution. But at the same time, we need to get back into, the federal government needs to get back into the business of long-term, stable, purpose-built rental that someone can live in for a lifetime, that they don't have to worry about, am I going to get displaced this month or next month?
Exactly.
And that has been the experience of far too many in our communities and far too many across Canada who have found themselves with the 3-month window to find somewhere else to live after living in a place for 20, 25 years. It's totally unacceptable, and it's really been driven by this idea of that market is going to fix affordable housing. It's not. Markets are driven for profit. There was a lot of profit to be made in the last 8 years in the housing market, especially in BC. And those developers that bought older buildings, that upzoned those buildings, that demolished those buildings, and that built and made a lot of money, took a lot of money out of the community, have done very, very well, and people have suffered for it.
Yes, that's true. Yeah. Now, thank you so much, Bonita, for all the information that you've given on affordable housing. Now, is there anything that you want to add to this interview, or you want to share with our audience?
Yeah. Well, I guess first of all, I would just say that the community is really concerned about affordable housing too, and we have such an amazing community in the Lower Mainland that really wants to do what they can to help. So I know that we have that support in the community, and it's just a matter of getting new legislation into place. So on the affordable housing front, I just want to thank all of the residents that reach out to me, that phone me, that share their stories, and that are working hard on this. And I'll just close on the income supports, because I do get people into my office regularly that want to make sure that they're getting their full entitlements from the federal government, that they're receiving the benefits that they should. And I was out at an event just last weekend, and a woman approached me to let me know that she had recently applied for the disability tax credit for her husband, which is a credit against your income, and that she had gotten back a sizable check. She didn't realize that he was eligible for a disability tax credit. It can go retroactive 10 years back. And so she had gotten a sizable check, which really helped her out. So I would say, if we could share with your viewers, that there are entitlements that I would like to talk about. One is the disability tax credit. And it doesn't necessarily mean that a person has a disability. It means that they meet other eligibility criteria, like perhaps it takes them longer, they can no longer feed themselves, or it takes them much longer to feed themselves. If they have mobility issues that limit their ability to get out into the community. There's many factors that don't necessarily apply to a disability. So if you're a senior, you could potentially be eligible for the disability tax credit, and I encourage your viewers to go to the Canadian website, the Government of Canada website, to look at that. The other one I wanted to talk about was the caregiver tax credit. There is actually a caregiver tax credit, and I know that there's many family members that care for their senior parents, maybe in their home, or a senior couple. One of the couple cares for the other one. There is also a tax credit for that. It's called the Canada Caregiver Tax Credit. And I would encourage your readers to, or your listeners to go take a look at that one too, because these are entitlements that Canadians have paid into for their whole life, and they deserve those tax credits back. And so I just encourage everyone, take a look at those two, the disability tax credit and the caregiver tax credit, and see if you would be entitled.
Yes, and they can actually reach you and come to your office if they have any questions. Am I right?
Absolutely. My office is open. Any member of Parliament, they can reach out to their office on these credits. Right now, I'm getting a lot of calls around the dental care.
Oh yeah,
yes.
Let's talk about that, because I have a question about dental.
Yes.
My dad was asking me to, if there is any dental care in place for this for seniors.
Absolutely. So this is one of the things that the federal NDP really, when we got elected, we promised Canadians that we would work on the dental care program. So over 100,000 kids in our area here in the Tri-Cities have received dental care, children under 12. Mm-hmm. In the new year, in 2024, this will be expanded to seniors, persons with disabilities, and all kids under the age of 18 will have access to free dental care based on their income. But this program is rolling out. And I had seniors in my office just recently, a couple, in tears with the pain that they've been suffering over the years, but didn't have the funds. It's not a priority that they can spend on, especially right now with the rising cost of housing, with the rising cost of the prices of food right now. So yes, I want your viewers to know that the dental program, the Canada Dental Program, the largest expansion in public health care in a generation, will come into place in 2024, or be expanded in 2024. And I'll close out by saying that we are working now on pharmacare. That was another initiative that the federal NDP has forced the government to do, basically forced the Liberal government to do, is pharmacare. And this will be life-changing for seniors in our community.
Definitely. Thank you, Bonita. We sincerely appreciate your time and the information that you have provided on affordable housing. Here you have it, folks. If you have any questions or you would like to learn more about affordable housing, please email us at skyrisemediasociety@gmail.com. Thank you for watching. See you next time.